Welcome to week 5 of hazardous waste and public law. The class is half over now. We make an important transition from RCRA to CERCLA. CERCLA is a very large law, but we'll briefly try to cover the highlights in the next couple slides. Generally, CERCLA is essentially a tort-like, backward-looking statute designed to clean up hazardous waste sites and respond to hazardous spills and releases of toxic waste into the environment. CERCLA is considered remedial rather than regulatory, and thus it focuses on remediation of past activities. The Act creates the Superfund, which the government may use to finance government response activities, to pay claims arising from private party response activities, and to compensate federal and state governments for damage to natural resources. The basic CERCLA blueprint for action is composed of two parts. The first part is the National Contingency Plan, NCP, and the second part is the National Priorities List, the NPL. The NCP establishes procedures and standards for responding to hazardous releases, whereas the NPL determines priorities among releases and threatened releases. Let's go into a little more detail for the National Contingency Plan. The National Contingency Plan actually does many things. First thing is it creates methodologies for identifying which sites are most in need of remediation. Another thing is it helps with the analyses for human health and environmental risk, and it has the requirements for state and community involvement in decision making. It also helps with selecting cost-effective remedies. Why spend more money than you have to? It has guidance for the Superfund monies that are spent. It sets cleanup standards. And it also just sets up a division of authority among different governmental organizations. A little history of the NCP is that in 1986, it was actually updated with the SARA amendments. Two items were addressed in these amendments. There was preference for remedial actions, and possibly more important, there was a hazard ranking system, the HRS. In 1990, the NCP was updated to include a national response system in which reportable quantities of releases were required to be called into the National Response Center. In addition, guidance was provided for the removals and remedial actions, in which 3 steps to cleaning up areas were explained. The first was preliminary site assessments and site inspections, PASI. The second was to help on decisions on emergency removal or remediation. And the third was, if remedial, then cost-effective permanent solutions needed to be found. So which sites are cleaned up first? This is where the National Priorities List is important. Here the EPA created a list of the worst possible hazardous waste sites. A hazard ranking system was used to determine which sites make the list. Then the EPA uses Superfund money and resources for the remedial actions only at sites on this National Priorities List. And of course there has to be a procedure to make it onto the list. This procedure would include items such as the preliminary assessment and site investigation, PASI, the hazard ranking system, maybe a state designation where the state actually picks the worst site in the state and that will automatically be placed on the list. And last, there's a toxic substance and disease registry which helps highlight which sites need to be cleaned up priority. Ouch! You're the owner of a site that is now on the national priorities list. What does this mean? Well, some of the consequences of being on that NPL listing are that it actually limits the EPA's cleanup authority to whatever is specified in CERCLA. Also, as the site owner, this is significant because it gives you visibility for federal investigation and possible response. As you can imagine, being on the national priorities list is probably not a good idea. Well, how do you get off the list? Well, it's not as easy a task as you might think. To actually be delisted from the list, you have to go to court and prove to the court that you should be delisted. You can be deleted from the list for a number of reasons, and probably the most important is the completion of all the necessary response actions to make sure that site is now clean.